doing it, and he gave a statement in which he really talked about the agony of watching a fellow Democratic president go through and put the... Let's talk about Lisa Murkowski.
Yeah, I think...
Let me read a little bit of her statement. Yeah. And John, I want you to walk. There are now 2 Republicans who will vote in favor of witnesses, Mitt Romney and Susan Collins of Maine. Lisa Murkowski will vote no, which is significant. Here's one of the things she says. Given the partisan nature of this impeachment from the very beginning and throughout, I have come to the conclusion that there will be no fair trial in the Senate. I don't believe the continuation of this process will change anything. It is sad for me to admit that as an institution, the Congress has failed. It has also become clear some of my colleagues intend to further politicize this process and drag the Supreme Court into it. She's very tough on this issue of the Supreme Court and the Chief Justice specifically. It sounds like that may have been her reason. She didn't want a 50-50 tie, which would have dragged the Chief Justice, John Roberts, into this whole thing. As a result, it's going to be 51-49.
It's kind of a kitchen sink statement in the sense that, look, you know, if she voted for witnesses, she would have put the Chief Justice in a bad position. Step back. We don't think he would have voted, but she would have had the tie. But she criticizes the House. Check. She criticizes the attacks on the Supreme Court. Is that Rand Paul for trying to expose the whistleblower and putting the Chief Justice in a bad position, or is Elizabeth Warren for proposing a question, or is it both? She's clearly not a fan of the president's behavior either. The interesting part to me is she made this decision, which will make her Republican colleagues happy because it will get the trial. We now know the trial will be over. It might go a few more days, but it won't be a few more weeks. But she apparently, according to Manu Raju and others on the CNN staff on the Hill, are among those pushing McConnell to take a few days here, to not rush the vote, so that senators can have time to speak. Susan Collins, who's in a tough re-election battle, working with her, according to Manu's reporting. That part is fascinating to me. Do these senators, how many of them? Lisa Murkowski, Susan Collins wanting time to speak and explain themselves? Doesn't surprise me, given their history. Their sort of semi-maverick role, if you will, or outlier role sometimes within the Republicans. But how many others? Are there others? You read Marco Rubio's statement, Jake, earlier today, where he, does take a shot at the president. He's not hugging not a tough one. I get it.
It's really between the lines. Right. You really have to squint.
Right. You have, and so does he just want his statement to stand for it and let this go, or do other senators, other Republican senators, want to go to the floor? Does Lamar Alexander want to go to the floor and read his statement into the record, where he does say, I don't like what the president did here. I just don't think it's impeachable.
Rob Portman from Ohio, Republican senator, actually used the word wrong. The W word, not just inappropriate.
This is in the impeachment trial, saying that there's no need for more evidence to prove something that has already been proven. It is a blow for Democrats who wanted to hear from John Bolton under oath, and it paves the way, potentially, for President Trump's acquittal. Here's Senate Republican Conference Chairman John Barrasso. He joined us top of the 9 o'clock hour this morning.
Senator Alexander is absolutely right. Impeachment should never be partisan. What we have here was a very partisan political process rushed through the House, political stunts being played by the House.
Senator Barrasso went on to say if there was any abuse of power, it was by the House with these impeachment articles. Joining me now live here on the ground is former White House press secretary, Fox News contributor Sarah Sanders. Good morning. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So what's your immediate reaction? A couple of days ago, Mitch McConnell was signaling, we may not have the votes to block witnesses. Things have changed rather dramatically.
Well, I think they've certainly changed for the better for the country. The fact that we've known this has been a waste of time and a sham from the beginning, and America's ready to move on. I think they've shown that by the lack of interest in the impeachment trials over the last couple of weeks. We've watched that interest completely plummet, and I think it's a great thing that we're moving on. This has been a huge week for the president. While Democrats have been focused on nothing but trying to tear the president down, he passed and signed into law the most historic trade deal and the biggest trade deal in USMCA.
USMCA talked about jobs.
Announced the peace plan. The economy's booming. America's doing better under this president, and I think finishing this up is a great lead-in to next week, where the president will stand in front of Nancy Pelosi fully vindicated when he gives the State of the Union.
Well, you jumped ahead to the State of the Union, which I want to ask you about. Why in the world then did Nancy Pelosi hold the articles of impeachment back for 33 days if now she set up a scenario where the president could be acquitted as early as today, and then one would assume he's going to walk out into that House chamber on Tuesday night feeling pretty strong.
I'll never begin to understand much of what Nancy Pelosi does, and this one is certainly, I think, mind-blowing for everyone. They forced it down everyone's throats, said it was an emergency. We had to do it right now. This had to take place today, and then they sat on it for nearly a month. It is absolutely ridiculous and malpractice, and I think it'll go down as one of the dumbest political moves that we've seen in a long time.
Now, you've laid out where you think the president is doing well right now. On the other hand, Lamar Alexander, this key swing vote, who's saying he'll vote no on witnesses, in his statement still went after the president. He said, quote, it was inappropriate for the president to ask a foreign leader to investigate his political opponent and to withhold U.S. aid to encourage that investigation. When elected officials inappropriately interfere with such investigations, it undermines the principle of equal justice under the law. How do you respond to that?
Look, I think the president did exactly what he should, and that's go after corruption. Whether it's Joe Biden or anyone else, the president pledged to drain the swamp, and that's exactly what he's doing.
But if he's draining the swamp, why would he be behaving inappropriately in the words of not my words, this is the words of a Republican senator who's now saying he doesn't necessarily think this meets the bar of impeachable and removable conduct, but contrary to the president saying it was a perfect phone call, Sarah, you have a Republican senator saying it was inappropriate.
I disagree with Senator Alexander, and I think if you look at what the majority of other Republican senators have said, they've taken a very different position than Senator Alexander and said they don't see anything wrong with what the president has done. In fact, I think it's a good thing the president's going after corruption. I think the big winner in this impeachment battle is certainly Donald Trump, and the big loser is Joe Biden. He's exposed the corruption around the Biden family, and I don't think anybody wants to see that corruption come back to Washington, and certainly not the White House.
On the point of Joe Biden, brand new poll we wake up to here in Des Moines, a national poll from the Wall Street Journal that says for the first time in their highly respected poll, Bernie Sanders is in the lead. It's within the margin of error. Joe Biden's still at the top there. But what do you make of Bernie Sanders seeming to surge here in Iowa, New Hampshire, and nationally?
Again, I think the impeachment battle has been a huge hit to Biden because it's exposed the corruption around him, and I don't think people want to see that come back to Washington. I don't think he's run a very good campaign. He doesn't seem to really want it. Bernie Sanders, I think, will be a great matchup for the president. Frankly, I don't see anybody in the Democrat field at this point that is going to be able to mount a real challenge to the president. If you look at what Donald Trump is going to do here over the next couple of days, it's the first glimpse and a first preview of the strength of his campaign, and he's got a great story to tell. The last 3 years have been one success after another under this president, and you're going to get to see him lay that out a lot in the State of the Union, but particularly over the next several months as we lead up to November.
At this rally last night here in Des Moines, the president talked about socialism on the ballot, seemed to be itching for the chance to face Bernie Sanders. Here's what he said about looking ahead in November.
But the Democrats are trying to overturn the last election. We will make sure that they face another crushing defeat, right, in 2020. November 3rd. November 3rd. Mark it off. November 3rd. Mark it off.
Look, there's no denying that the president had, some of his supporters were here 30 hours before that rally, freezing cold temperatures. He fires up the crowds. On the other hand, Kate Bedingfield, one of Vice President Biden's advisors, was on the program earlier, and she said, if you go back to the Ukraine story, this president is afraid. He may want to take on Bernie Sanders, but he's afraid to take on Joe Biden in Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, some of those blue-collar states that the president won.
Honestly, I think that's laughable. I mean, look at the contrast between the Biden campaign and the Trump campaign. Last night, you had thousands of people that waited hours to be part of that event. They had to shut it down nearly an hour and a half before the event started because it was at max capacity. On the other hand, you have a handful of Biden people showing up. Half of them are asleep. I mean, the contrast
is you're joking a little bit, right? They're not all sleeping. But.
Well, not all, but I think they're close to it. I mean, it is absolutely absurd to think that the Biden campaign at this point can even be compared to where the Trump campaign is and the amount of enthusiasm behind him. The Bernie Sanders campaign has some enthusiasm, but I think most of America will quickly see they don't want America to be Venezuela, and that is exactly the path that Bernie
Sarah
Sanders will
Sanders,
take
we
us
appreciate
down.
you coming in.
Thank you so much for having me.
Don't overpay for makeup.